Sometimes the loneliest souls find each other in the most unexpected places. This is the story of Margaret Maggie Thompson, a 47-year-old librarian who had built walls so high around her heart that even she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. And Caleb Big Cal Morrison, a 6 rancher whose gentle giant reputation masked a soul that had been waiting 20 years for the right person to come home to. What happened when their worlds collided on a rain-soaked highway outside Millbrook, Montana, would change everything they thought they knew about second chances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the windshield of Maggie Thompson's ancient Honda Civic like angry fists demanding entry. She squinted through the darkness, her knuckles white against the steering wheel as she navigated the winding mountain road that led away from Millbrook, away from another failed job interview, away from another door slammed shut in her face. At 47, Maggie had perfected the art of starting over, though she wouldn't call it perfection. More like a survival skill honed through necessity. The cardboard boxes in her backseat contained everything she owned: 3 changes of clothes, a collection of worn paperback novels, her grandmother's china teacup wrapped in newspaper, and a manila folder thick with rejection letters from libraries across Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado. 20-5 years. That's how long it had been since she'd had anyone to call when the world felt too heavy to carry alone. 25 years since her parents died in that car accident, leaving her at 22 with nothing but debt and the crushing realization that she was utterly, completely alone in the world. She'd thought time would make it easier, that eventually the ache of solitude would fade into background noise. Instead, it had grown roots, threading through her bones until loneliness became as much a part of her as breathing. The job interview in Millbrook had been her last shot in Montana. Head librarian position at the town's newly renovated library. She'd prepared for weeks, practiced her answers in the bathroom mirror of whatever cheap motel she was calling home. But the moment she walked into that conference room and saw the way the hiring committee's eyes swept over her, taking in her second-hand blazer with the carefully mended sleeve, her scuffed shoes, the desperate hunger she couldn't quite hide, she knew it was over before it began. "We're looking for someone with more energy," the board chairman had said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Someone who can really connect with our community's younger families." Translation: someone younger. Someone who hadn't been worn down by a quarter-century of rejection and disappointment. Someone who still believed in happy endings now. Driving through the storm with nowhere left to go, Maggie felt the familiar weight settling back onto her shoulders. She'd done this dance so many times she could choreograph it in her sleep. Pack up, drive to the next town, find the cheapest place to stay, scan the job boards, prepare for another round of polite dismissals disguised as professional courtesy. Honda's engine made a concerning rattling sound as she crested a hill. She'd been nursing the car along for months, coaxing it from town to town with prayers and sheer willpower. The mechanic in her last stop had shaken his head when she'd asked about the noise. "Lady, this thing's held together with hope and duct tape," he'd said. "You need a new transmission, probably a new engine while we're at it. Looking at least $3,000 to make it roadworthy." $3,000. She had $87 in her checking account and a maxed-out credit card she'd been avoiding using for anything but absolute emergencies. The Honda would have to last just a little longer, just until she could find work somewhere. Anywhere. As if the universe had been listening, the engine gave one final shuddering wheeze and died. Maggie coasted to the shoulder, her heart hammering as she tried the ignition. Nothing, not even the familiar rattle. She tried again, pumping the gas pedal with the desperate energy of someone who had run out of backup plans. "Come on," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, not now, not here." But the Honda had given up, and as the reality of her situation Settled in, Maggie felt something break inside her chest. She was stranded on a dark mountain road in the middle of nowhere, with no money for a tow truck, no family to call, no safety net of any kind. Just her and the storm and the crushing weight of being completely, utterly alone. She pulled out her phone, no signal. Of course, for a moment, she just sat there in the gathering cold, listening to the rain drum against the roof and feeling the familiar despair creep up her throat. This was rock bottom, she realized. After 25 years of barely getting by, of making do with less, of building a life from the scraps the world had left behind, she had finally run out of road. But Maggie Thompson hadn't survived a quarter-century alone by giving up easily. She pulled her jacket tighter, grabbed her purse, and stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked through her thin jacket immediately, and within seconds she was shivering. But she started walking anyway, following the yellow line down the center of the road like a lifeline. Maybe she'd find a house with a landline. Maybe a passing car would stop. Maybe, for once in 25 years, the universe would throw her a bone. She'd been walking for what felt like hours when she saw the lights. Warm yellow rectangles glowing through the darkness like beacons of hope. As she got closer, she could make out the shape of a large farmhouse set back from the road, with a wraparound porch and smoke curling from the chimney. A hand-painted sign by the gate read, "Morrison Ranch, Est, 1952. Maggie hesitated at the edge of the driveway. She'd spent so many years keeping to herself, maintaining the careful distance that protected her from disappointment, that the thought of knocking on a stranger's door felt almost revolutionary. But her teeth were chattering now, and her shoes were squelching with every step. She didn't have a choice. The porch steps creaked under her weight as she climbed them, and for a moment she stood frozen in front of the heavy wooden door, her hand raised to knock. What would she say? How do you explain to strangers that your entire life has just fallen apart on their doorstep? Before she could lose her nerve, she knocked. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo in the storm. Footsteps approached from inside, heavy and measured. The door opened, and Maggie found herself looking up, way up, at the largest man she'd ever seen. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that filled the doorframe and hands that could probably palm a basketball. His dark hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his fingers through it, and his brown eyes held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing size. He was maybe in his early 50s, with laugh lines around his eyes and the kind of tan that came from years of outdoor work. "Ma'am." His voice was deep and soft, with just a hint of concern. "You okay out there?" Maggie realized she was staring and tried to find her words. My car broke down about a mile back. I was wondering if I could use your phone to call." "For help?" He stepped back immediately, gesturing her inside. "Of course. Come on in out of that storm. You're soaked clear through." The warmth hit her like a physical embrace as she stepped into the entry hall. The house smelled like coffee and wood smoke and something baking in the oven, the kind of homey scents that Maggie hadn't experienced in years. Her apartment living and motel stays hadn't exactly been conducive to home baking. "I'm Caleb Morrison," the giant said, closing the door behind her. "But most folks just call me Big Cal." "Margaret Thompson," she replied, then added, "Maggie." He nodded toward the living room. "Phone's right in there. But let me get you a towel first, and maybe some coffee to warm you up. You look like you've been through a ringer." Maggie wanted to protest, to maintain the polite distance she'd perfected over the years, but she was shivering so hard now that her words came out as chattering syllables. Cal disappeared down a hallway and returned with a thick, soft towel that smelled like fabric softener and sunshine. "Here you go," he said, draping it around her shoulders with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "Coffee's fresh made. How do you take it?" "Black is fine," she managed, wrapping the towel tighter around herself. As Cal moved toward what she assumed was the kitchen, Maggie took in her surroundings. The living room was exactly what she'd expect from a working ranch. Comfortable furniture that had seen years of use but was well maintained. Family photos scattered across the mantel, and a stone fireplace with a fire crackling warmly. It was the kind of room that invited you to stay, to put your feet up and forget about the world outside. She found the phone on a side table and dialed the number for directory assistance, asking for local towing services. The operator connected her to Peterson's Towing, where a gruff voice informed her that they were closed until morning due to the storm. "What about emergency calls?" Maggie asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Lady, unless somebody's bleeding or dying, it ain't an emergency worth risking my neck in this weather. Call back after 8 a.m. The line went dead, and Maggie stared at the phone in her hand, feeling the last of her composure begin to crumble. She was stranded. Truly, completely stranded, with nowhere to go and no way to get there. No luck? Cal's voice was gentle as he appeared in the doorway, carrying a steaming mug. Maggie shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm ceramic. "Storm's supposed to blow through by morning," he said, settling into an armchair across from her. "Peterson's probably right to wait it out. These mountain roads can be treacherous in weather like this." Maggie nodded, staring into her coffee cup. I should find somewhere to stay until morning. Is there a motel nearby?" Cal was quiet for a moment, and when she looked up, his expression was thoughtful. "Closest one's about 20 miles back toward town. And even if we could get you there safely, which I doubt in this storm, it's not exactly what you'd call ... welcoming." Something in his tone told her there was more to that story, but she didn't press. She was a stranger here, after all. An unwelcome complication in this man's peaceful evening. "I'm sorry," she said, setting down the mug and standing. "I shouldn't have bothered you. I'll figure something out." But Cal was already shaking his head, rising to his full imposing height. "Ma'am, I wasn't suggesting you leave. Just the opposite, actually." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've got a guest room upstairs that's not being used for anything but collecting dust. You're welcome to stay the night. Get this sorted out in the morning when the weather clears." Maggie blinked at him, certain she'd misheard. I couldn't. I don't even know you." "Name's Caleb Morrison. Like I said, I'm 49 years old. Been running this ranch since my dad passed 15 years ago. Never been married, no kids. And I've got exactly one speeding ticket on my record from 1998. His mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "I make a decent pot of coffee. I don't snore too loud, and I give you my word that you'll be safe under my roof." There was something in his eyes, a sincerity that cut through all of Maggie's carefully constructed defenses. This was a man who meant what he said, who understood what it meant to offer genuine kindness to a stranger. "I can pay you," she said quickly. "For the room, I mean." "I don't have much, but—" Cal held up a hand, stopping her. "Ma'am, when's the last time you just let somebody help you? No strings, no payment, just ... I'll help." The question hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time? Had there ever been a time, in all her 25 years of solitude, when someone had simply offered kindness without expecting something in return? Double quote she started, then stopped. Her throat felt tight, and she realized with horror that tears were threatening. She never cried. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford, a weakness that led to more pain than relief. But something about this gentle giant, about the warmth of his home and the sincere concern in his eyes, was unraveling 25 years of careful self-protection. "I've been alone for 25 years, she heard herself saying, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I've been taking care of myself for so long, I forgot what it feels like when someone else cares." Cal's expression softened, and for a moment, the only sound was the storm raging outside and the gentle crackle of the fire. Then he spoke. his voice so quiet she almost missed it over the rain. Well then, I guess it's about time that changed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maggie stared at Cal across the warm living room, his words hanging in the air between. Then, like a promise she wasn't sure she knew how to accept. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls, lined with family photographs, generations of Morrisons who had called this place home. I should warn you, Cal said, settling back into his chair with the careful movements of a man aware of his own size. This old house creaks something fierce at night. Wind gets under the eaves and makes all sorts of racket. Don't let it spook you. Maggie nodded, clutching her coffee mug like an anchor. I'm not easily spooked. It was true, mostly. 25 years of living alone had taught her to handle strange noises, power outages, and things that went bump in the night. But kindness from strangers? That was uncharted territory. Cal studied her face with those warm brown eyes, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her carefully maintained composure. You said you've been alone for 25 years. That's a long time to carry everything by yourself. She looked down at her hands, noting the way her fingers had finally stopped trembling from the cold. You learned to adapt. Make do with what you have. That's surviving, Cal said quietly. Not the same thing as living. The observation struck deeper than she expected, and Maggie felt her defenses rising instinctively. She'd spent decades perfecting the art of not needing anyone, of being completely self-sufficient. It was how she'd survived losing her parents, how she'd navigated an endless series of temporary jobs and temporary homes without falling apart completely. I've done just fine on my own, she said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. Cal didn't flinch at her tone. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his massive frame somehow managing to seem less intimidating rather than more. I'm sure you have. Takes a special kind of strength to make it on your own for that long. But that doesn't mean you have to keep doing it forever. Before Maggie could respond, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the house. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging them into darkness save for the orange glow from the fireplace. Well, Cal's voice came through the shadows, tinged with wry humor. Looks like Mother Nature's got opinions about our conversation. Maggie heard him moving around in the dark, his footsteps sure and confident despite the lack of light. A match flared, and she watched him light an oil lamp on the mantel, then another on the side table. The warm light cast everything in a golden glow that made the room feel even cozier than before. Power goes out fairly regular up here, he explained, settling back into his chair. Storm like this, we'll be lucky if it comes back before noon tomorrow. But we've got plenty of firewood, and the stove in the kitchen runs on propane. We'll be comfortable enough. The casual way he said, we sent an unexpected warmth through Maggie's chest. When was the last time she'd been part of a we, even temporarily? Even in something as simple as weathering a power outage. I grew up in a house like this, she found herself saying. Old farmhouse outside of Billings. My grandmother lived with us before she passed, and she always kept oil lamps in every room. Said electricity was too newfangled to trust completely. Cal smiled at that, the expression transforming his weathered features. Smart woman. My dad was the same way. This place has been in the Morrison family since 1952, and we've learned not to count on modern conveniences too heavily. Your family's been here a long time, Maggie observed, gesturing toward the photographs on the mantel. 3 generations now. Dad built this house to replace the original cabin my grandfather started with. Mom always said it was too big for the 3 of us, but Dad had grand plans. Cal's expression grew distant. He wanted a house full of kids and grandkids. Thought the Morrison name would keep going for generations. There was something in his tone that made Maggie look at him more closely, but that didn't happen. Cal was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. I was engaged once. Sarah Mitchell. We were going to be married in the spring. Fill this house with the next generation of Morrisons. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. She decided she wanted something different. Someone different. Said living on a ranch in the middle of nowhere wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself. Maggie felt a familiar pang of recognition. The sting of being found lacking, of not being enough. I'm sorry. Long time ago now. 20 years come this fall. Cal looked at her directly. Funny how some hurts stay fresh, isn't it? Even when you think you've moved past them. She knew exactly what he meant. The day her parents died, the moment she realized she was truly alone in the world, it felt like yesterday sometimes, despite the decades that had passed. After Sarah left, Cal continued, I threw myself into the ranch. Told myself I didn't need anyone else, that I was better off alone. Built up these walls so high that even I couldn't see over them anymore. But you seem so ... Maggie searched for the right word. Open, welcoming. You invited a complete stranger into your home without hesitation. Cal chuckled, but there was no humor in it. You're the first person who stepped foot in this house in probably 5 years. Other than the vet when one of the horses is sick, or the supply delivery guys who won't come past the front porch. The admission stunned her. This warm, comfortable home that felt so lived in and welcoming, Cal had been rattling around in it. Alone for years, just like she'd been drifting from one empty apartment to another. Why? She asked. Why did you let me in? He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the circle of lamplight, everything felt suspended in time. You know that look, he said. Finally, when someone's carrying so much weight they can barely stand upright, but they're too proud or too scared to ask for help. I saw it in my own mirror for the better part of 2 decades. Maggie's breath caught. And you saw it in me. From the moment you knocked on my door. Soaked to the bone, trying so hard to hold it together, asking for just a phone call when it was clear you needed so much more than that. Cal leaned back in his chair. Maybe I let you in because I finally understood what it felt like to be on the other side of that door. The vulnerability in his voice undid something in Maggie's chest. Here was this giant of a man, admitting to the same loneliness that had been her constant companion for 25 years. The same walls, the same fear, the same bone-deep exhaustion. That came from carrying everything alone. I used to be different, she said softly. Before my parents died, I was ... social. I had friends, dreams, plans for the future. I was going to be a teacher, maybe write children's books on the side. I believed in happy endings. What changed? Maggie traced the rim of her coffee mug with one finger. Everything. My parents left me with nothing but debt and a mortgage I couldn't afford. I had to drop out of college, sell the house, start over completely. And every time I tried to build something, a career, a relationship, even just a friendship, something would go wrong. People would leave, or I'd lose my job, or I'd have to move again. She looked up at him. After a while, you stop trying. It hurts less when you don't expect anything from anyone. Cal nodded slowly. Easier to be alone by choice than to risk. Being left alone by someone else's. Exactly. The word came out like a sigh of relief. Finally, someone who understood. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the storm and watching the fire burn lower. Maggie found herself studying Cal's profile in the lamplight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands rested calmly on the arms of his chair despite his obvious size and strength. There was something deeply peaceful about him, like still water running deep. Can I ask you something? She said eventually. Shoot. Why didn't you ever leave? After Sarah, after your parents passed, why stay here alone? Cal considered the question. his gaze moving around the room as if seeing it through her eyes. "This land, this house, it's all I've ever known how to be. My dad taught me that a man takes care of what's his, sees it through good times and bad. Even if it gets lonely," he paused, "maybe especially then. That's a lot of responsibility for one person. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been braver. If I'd sold the ranch after Dad died and tried to find a different life. Somewhere else." Cal's voice grew thoughtful. "But then I think about all the storms this house has weathered, all the generations who've called it home. Seemed wrong to be the one to walk away." Maggie understood that kind of responsibility, that weight of being the last one left to carry on. She'd felt it too, in smaller ways, being the last Thompson, the only one left to remember her parents, to carry their memory forward. "You never wanted children of your own?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." But Cal didn't seem offended. "Used to think I did. Imagine teaching a son to work cattle or a daughter to ride horses. But after Sarah ... he shrugged. "Hard to picture a family when you can't even picture sharing your life with another adult." The honesty of his admission took her breath away. How long had it been since someone had spoken to her with such openness, such trust? In her world of job interviews and temporary arrangements, conversation stayed safely on the surface. Nobody talked about dreams deferred or hearts carefully guarded. "I used to work with children," she said, "as a librarian. Storytime on Tuesday mornings, helping kids with their school projects. I loved seeing their faces light up when they discovered a new book." She smiled at the memory. "But I always went home alone to an empty apartment. Never had any of my own." "You ever want them? Kids, I mean." The question hit her like a physical blow. Want children? She'd wanted them so desperately in her 20s that it had been a constant ache. But as the years passed and relationships failed and life became about mere survival, that dream had gotten buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it existed. "I wanted everything," she said quietly. "Husband, children, a house with a garden and a dog. The whole American dream package. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing I deserved it." Cal leaned forward, his voice intense. "What makes you think you don't deserve it?" The question hung in the air between them, and Maggie realized she didn't have a good answer. What did make her think that? The years of rejection? The string of failed relationships? The constant struggle just to keep her head above water? Or was it something deeper, a voice in her head that whispered she wasn't worth loving, wasn't worth staying for, wasn't worth the effort it would take to build a real life with someone? "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I'm just tired of wanting things I can't have." Cal was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "Maybe the problem isn't that you can't have them. Maybe the problem is that you've been trying to get them all by yourself." The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and heavy with possibility. Outside, the storm was beginning to ease, the thunder moving farther away. But inside, by the dying fire, Maggie felt something shift in her chest. A crack in the walls she'd built so carefully, so high, for the first time in 25 years, she wondered what it might be like to stop running, to stop surviving and start living. To let someone else help carry the weight she'd been bearing alone for so long. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and Cal rose to add another log. As he moved around the room, banking the fire and checking the oil in the lamps, Maggie watched him with new eyes. This man who had opened his door to a stranger, who had listened without judgment, who had shared his own loneliness so freely, what would it be like to stay in his orbit for more than just one night? The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, because for the first time in decades, Maggie Thompson was beginning to remember what hope felt like. Maggie woke to the sound of silence. After 25 years of thin apartment walls, Noisy neighbors and the constant hum of city life, the profound quiet of the Montana morning, was almost unsettling. No traffic, no sirens, no voices drifting through paper-thin walls. Just the soft whisper of wind through pine trees and the distant lowing of cattle. She lay still for a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains she hadn't noticed the night before, illuminating a guest room that spoke of careful preparation. The quilt covering her was handmade intricate log cabin pattern in blues and greens that reminded her of mountain lakes. A water pitcher and basin sat on an antique washstand, and fresh towels were stacked neatly on a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. The thoughtfulness of it struck her immediately. This wasn't a hastily prepared space for an unexpected guest. Cal had put real care into making this room welcoming. The realization sent an unfamiliar warmth through her chest. Her clothes from the night before were draped over a chair, dry now but hopelessly wrinkled. She finger-combed her hair and splashed water from the pitcher on her face, trying to make herself presentable. In the small mirror above the washstand, she caught sight of herself and paused. When was the last time she'd looked this rested? The constant tension she carried in her shoulders had eased, and for the first time in months, she didn't look like she was bracing for the next disaster. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her downstairs, following the sound of movement in what she assumed was the kitchen. She found Cal standing at a massive cast-iron stove, spatula in hand, his back to her. He'd changed into a fresh flannel shirt, and his dark hair was still damp from what must have been an early morning shower. "Morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Morning. Hope I didn't wake you. I'm usually up before dawn, habit from 30 years of ranch work. The quiet woke me, actually. I'm not used to it being so peaceful." Cal chuckled as he flipped bacon in the pan. "City girl, huh?" "Yeah, the silence takes some getting used to." Sarah used to say it was too quiet, that it made her feel like the world had ended and we were the only two people left. Maggie caught the wistful note in his voice and wondered if he realized he'd mentioned his ex-fiancée twice now in less than 12 hours. 20 years, and the wound was still tender enough to surface in casual conversation. "I like it," she sighed, settling at the kitchen table without being invited. The normalcy of it sitting in someone's kitchen while they cooked felt both foreign and achingly familiar. It feels safe. Cal glanced at her over his shoulder. "When's the last time you felt safe?" The question caught her off guard. She started to give a flip answer, then stopped. He'd been honest with her last night, sharing things he probably didn't discuss with anyone. She owed him the same courtesy. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe not since before my parents died. Even then, safety felt temporary, like something that could be taken away without warning." He nodded, understanding in his expression. "After Dad's heart attack, I felt that way for years. Like I was just waiting for the next shoe to drop. The bank to foreclose, the cattle to get sick, something to prove that I couldn't handle all this on my own. But you did handle it. You're still here. So are you." He turned to face her fully, spatula still in hand. 25 years of handling everything that got thrown at you, and you're still standing. That's not nothing, Maggie." The way he said her name gentle, like it mattered, made something flutter in her chest. She looked away, focusing on the kitchen around her. Like the rest of the house, it was clearly designed for a family. A large farmhouse table that could seat 8, open shelves lined with dishes for entertaining, a window over the sink that looked out on what must be a spectacular view in daylight. "This is a beautiful home," she said, deflecting from the compliment she didn't know how to accept. Mom's design. She had big plans for this kitchen. Holiday dinners, birthday parties, Sunday suppers with neighbors. Cal's voice grew quiet. "Seems silly now, keeping up a place this size for just me." "It's not silly, it's..." She searched for the right words. It's hopeful. Like you're keeping it ready for the life you want, even if it hasn't happened yet. Cal stared at her for a long moment, then turned back to the stove. Never thought of it that way. He plated eggs and bacon with the efficiency of someone accustomed to cooking for himself, but she noticed he'd made enough for two without asking if she wanted breakfast. Another small kindness that spoke of innate thoughtfulness. "Power's back on," he said, setting a plate in front of her. "Came on about an hour ago. I called Peterson's Towing while you were sleeping. They'll be out to look at your car around 10. Maggie felt reality crash back down around her. Of course. The car, the breakdown, the fact that she had nowhere to go and no money to fix whatever was wrong. She'd been so caught up in the strange comfort of this place that she'd almost forgotten she was essentially homeless. "Thank you," she said, though. The words felt inadequate. "I'll pay you back for the tow truck call. And for breakfast, and the room ... Maggie." Cal's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Stop." She looked up at him, fork halfway to her mouth. "I know you're used to keeping track of every debt, every favor, every penny owed. But you're not in debt to me. You're a guest in my home, and guests don't pay for breakfast." The concept was so foreign to her that she almost argued. 25 years of scraping by had taught her that nothing was free, that every kindness came with strings attached. But something in Cal's steady gaze told her that pushing back would offend him. "I'm not used to this," she said quietly. "Used? To what? People being kind without wanting something in return." Cal sat down across from her, his own plate forgotten. "What kind of world have you been living in, that kindness always comes with a price tag?" She thought about the question as she took a bite of eggs perfectly cooked, seasoned just right. The kind where you learn to be suspicious of generosity, because it usually means someone wants something you can't afford to give. Like what? Like... She hesitated, then decided to trust him with the truth. "I had a landlord once who offered to reduce my rent in exchange for companionship. A boss who said he could guarantee my job security if I was flexible about my duties. A neighbor who offered to help with my groceries, but expected me to listen to him complain about his wife for hours every night." Cal's jaw tightened, and for a moment she glimpsed the steel beneath his gentle exterior. "That's not kindness. That's manipulation. I know that now. But when you're desperate, when you're one paycheck away from homelessness, it's hard to tell the difference sometimes. And you think that's what this is? Me manipulating you somehow?" The hurt in his voice made her chest ache. No, I don't think that. But I don't understand why you're helping me either. What you get out of it." Cal was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the brightening morning. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "You know what I get out of it? For the first time in 20 years, this house doesn't feel empty. Last night, listening to the storm with someone else, sharing stories by the fire, I remembered what it felt like to have a reason to make coffee for 2 people instead of 1. The honesty of it took her breath away. She'd been so focused on what kindness might cost her that she hadn't considered what it might give the person offering it. "I feel it too," she admitted. "I woke up this morning, and for about 30 seconds, I forgot to be afraid. Just forgot. I can't remember the last time that happened." Cal's smile was soft and genuine. "Maybe we're both getting something out of this then." They ate in comfortable silence after that, and Maggie found herself noticing details she'd missed the night before. The way morning light caught the copper pots hanging from hooks above the stove, the herbs growing in small pots on the windowsill, basil, rosemary, thyme, a calendar on the wall marked with veterinary appointments and supply deliveries, evidence of a life carefully organized around the needs of the ranch. "How many cattle do you run?" she asked. "About 200 head. Nothing huge by Montana standards, but enough to keep me busy." Cal leaned back in his chair. "Dad always said this land could support twice that, but it's just me now. Hard to expand when you're doing most of the work yourself. You don't have any help? Hire seasonal hands during calving and roundup. Rest of the year, it's just me and the horses. He paused. Gets lonely sometimes, but I like the work. There's something honest about it. Cattle don't care about your problems or your past. They just need to be fed and watered and kept safe. Maggie heard the unspoken comparison to human relationships, which were messier and more unpredictable. Sounds peaceful. Most days, others. Cal shrugged. Others. I wonder what the hell I'm doing out here, talking to cows and going weeks without seeing another soul. But you stay. Where would I go? This is all I know. The words hung between them, and Maggie recognized the trap they both lived in, the fear of change that kept them locked in situations that weren't making them happy, simply because they were familiar. A truck rumbled up the driveway, breaking the morning quiet. Cal glanced at the clock above the stove. That'll be Peterson. Right on time. He stood, carrying his plate to the sink. You want to come out and see what we're dealing with, or would you rather wait here? The question was casual, but Maggie caught the underlying message. He was giving her the choice to face reality or avoid it a little longer. Part of her wanted to stay in the warm kitchen, pretending for just a few more minutes that she belonged in this peaceful place, but she'd been running from hard truths for too long. I'll come, she said, following him toward the door. Outside, the morning was crisp and clear, the storm having washed the air clean. Peterson turned out to be a grizzled man in his 60s, with grease-stained overalls and knowing eyes. He looked at Maggie's Honda and shook his head before he even popped the hood. Transmission's shot, he confirmed after a few minutes of poking around. Engine's not far behind. You might get another 100 miles out of her if you're real lucky, but I wouldn't bet money on it. Maggie felt her heart sink into her boots. How much to fix it? Peterson scratched his stubbled chin. If it was worth fixing, which it's not, you'd be looking at $4,000, maybe $5,000. But honestly, miss, you'd be throwing good money after. Bad, this car's done. $5,000. She had $87 in her checking account. What about trade-in value? She asked desperately. Peterson's expression grew kinder. Scrap metal's going for about $300 a ton. I could haul it away for you, maybe get you $200 for it. But that's about all she's worth now. $200. Enough for maybe a week in a cheap motel, if she could find one. Certainly not enough to buy another car, or rent an apartment, or do anything except delay the inevitable. Cal stepped forward. Thanks, Earl. Can you give us a day or two to figure out what she wants to do? Sure thing, Cal. No rush on my end. Peterson tipped his hat to Maggie. Sorry, miss. No, it's not what you wanted to hear. After the tow truck left, they stood in the driveway looking at her dead Honda. Maggie felt 25 years of barely contained panic rising in her throat. No car meant no way to job hunt, no way to travel to interviews, no way to escape when things went wrong. Hey, Cal's voice was gentle. It's going to be okay. No, it's not. The words came out sharper than she intended. You don't understand. That car was my entire life. My home, my transportation, my security. Without it, I'm completely stranded. You're not stranded, you're here. For how long? I can't stay here. Forever, Cal. I'm nobody to you. A stranger who knocked on your door in the rain. You don't owe me anything, and I can't keep accepting charity. What if it's not charity? The question stopped her cold. What? Cal ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncertain. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about being tired of doing everything alone, about what I said about this place being too big for just me. Maggie's heart began to race, though she wasn't sure if it was from hope or terror. I need help around here, Cal continued. Real help. Someone to manage the books, handle supply orders, maybe help with the horses. Someone who understands that this isn't just a job, it's a way of life. He looked at her directly, his brown eyes serious. I'm not offering charity, Maggie. I'm offering partnership. A place to belong, work that matters, a chance to build something, instead of just surviving day to day. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Everything she'd dreamed of: security, purpose, a place to call home, wrapped up in words that were both the answer to her prayers and her deepest fear. Because accepting would mean staying, trusting, opening herself up to the possibility of loss all over again. And after 25 years of protecting herself from exactly that kind of vulnerability, Maggie wasn't sure she was brave enough to say yes. Maggie stared at Cal as if he'd just spoken in a foreign language. Partnership. The word echoed in her mind like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through 25 years of carefully constructed independence. I need time to think, she said finally, wrapping her arms around herself despite the warming morning sun. Of course. Cal's voice held no pressure, no urgency. Take all the time you need. Why don't I show you around the place? Might help you get a sense of what you'd be signing up for. They walked in comfortable silence toward the barn, a massive structure that had clearly been built to last generations. As they approached, a black and white border collie came bounding around the corner, tail wagging furiously. That's Scout, Cal said, his face lighting up as the dog launched himself at his legs. He's supposed to be a working dog, but he's more like a four-legged shadow who happens to be good with cattle. Scout immediately transferred his attention to Maggie, sniffing her cautiously before pressing his head against her palm for pets. The simple gesture, unconditional acceptance from a creature who knew nothing about her past, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. He likes you, Cal observed. Scout's usually suspicious of strangers. Took him 3 visits to warm up to the veterinarian. Inside the barn, Maggie was struck by the meticulous organization. Tools hung in precise rows, feed bins were clearly labeled, and the scent of hay and leather created an atmosphere of honest work and careful stewardship. 6 horse stalls lined one wall, currently housing 4 animals who nickered curiously at their approach. These are the working horses, Cal explained, producing apple slices from his pocket with practiced ease. Ranger and Molly are my primary cow horses, been with me for 8 years now. That's Thunder, he's getting older but still reliable. And this beauty is Luna. Luna was a gray mare with intelligent eyes who immediately pushed her head over the stall toward Maggie. Without thinking, Maggie reached out to stroke the velvet soft nose, earning a gentle whicker of approval. She's gorgeous, Maggie breathed, and smart as a whip. I bought her as a 3-year-old from a ranch down in Wyoming. She'd been mistreated, wouldn't let anyone near her. Took me 6 months to earn her trust, but once I did. Cal's voice grew soft with affection. She'd follow me anywhere now. There was something in the way he talked about Luna, patient, understanding, willing to wait for trust to develop naturally, that made Maggie wonder if he was trying to tell her something beyond the surface story. What would my responsibilities be? She asked, still stroking Luna's neck. If I stayed, I mean. Cal leaned against a support beam, seeming to choose his words carefully. Bookkeeping, mostly. Supply orders, veterinary scheduling, keeping track of cattle records. During busy seasons, maybe helping with the horses' feeding, grooming, basic care. Nothing you couldn't learn, and nothing I'd expect you to jump into without proper training. I've never worked on a ranch before. I've never had a business partner before. We'd both be figuring it out as we go. The word partner sent another jolt through her system. In all her years of temporary jobs and temporary living situations, no one had ever offered her real partnership, real investment in her future. What about living arrangements? The question felt both practical and terrifying. Guest room is yours as long as you want it. This house has 6 bedrooms, more space. Then I know what to do with. Cal paused, his cheeks coloring slightly. I'm not. I wouldn't expect anything beyond what you're comfortable with. This would be a business arrangement first and foremost. The clarification should have been reassuring, but instead, it left Maggie feeling oddly deflated. What was wrong with her? She'd spent decades avoiding romantic entanglements, protecting herself from the vulnerability that came with caring about someone. So why did Cal's careful professionalism sting? They continued the tour, Cal showing her the equipment barn, the pastures where cattle grazed contentedly, the small vegetable garden his mother had started and he'd maintained more from sentiment than necessity. With each new vista, each careful explanation of ranch operations, Maggie felt the weight of possibility growing heavier. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a complete life change, a chance to become part of something larger than her own daily survival, the kind of opportunity she'd stopped dreaming about years ago. It's beautiful, she said as they stood on a small rise overlooking the entire spread. Rolling pastures stretched toward pine-covered mountains, and cattle dotted the landscape like peaceful brown and black sculptures. It's like something out of a painting. Dad used to say this land gets into your blood. Once you've seen sunrise over these mountains, everywhere else looks flat and colorless. Cal's voice carried deep affection. I used to think he was just making excuses for never leaving. Now, I understand what he meant. You've never wanted to travel? See other places? Cal was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When Sarah left, I thought about selling everything and starting over somewhere new. Maybe California or Colorado. Somewhere nobody knew about the Morrison Ranch or the guy who got left at the altar. What stopped you? Fear, mostly. This place. These responsibilities, they're all I've ever known how to be. Without the ranch, without the land, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. He looked at her directly. Sound familiar? It did. The parallel between his fear of leaving his identity behind and her fear of trusting someone enough to build a new one was uncomfortably clear. What if I'm terrible at it? She asked suddenly. What if I can't learn the bookkeeping or the horses? Don't like me, or I make some mistake that costs you money you can't afford to lose? Cal's smile was gentle. What if you're exactly what this place has been missing? What if you take to ranch life like Luna took to trust slowly at first, then completely? What if instead of costing me money, you help me build something bigger than either of us could manage alone? The hope in his voice was almost harder to bear than doubt would have been. Hope meant expectations, and expectations meant the possibility of disappointment, for both of them. I should probably mention, Maggie said, staring at the mountains. To avoid his eyes, I'm not exactly the easiest person to live with. I'm used to being alone. I keep odd hours, I'm particular about how I organize things, and I haven't shared space with another person in ... well, ever, really. I get up at 5 a.m., I listen to country music while I work, and I sometimes talk to the cattle when I'm checking on them, Cal replied. I also haven't shared my space with anyone in 20 years. We'll both have adjustments to make. Before Maggie could respond, the sound of another vehicle approaching caught their attention. A red pickup truck was winding up the long driveway, dust trailing behind it. That's my neighbor, Bill Henderson, Cal said, his tone shifting slightly. Owns this spread to the east. Probably heard through the grapevine that I had company. As the truck pulled up beside the house, Maggie could see the driver clearly, a weathered man in his 60s with suspicious eyes and the kind of posture that suggested he'd appointed himself unofficial guardian of local morality. Cal Henderson called out as he climbed from his truck. His gaze immediately fixed on Maggie with undisguised curiosity. Heard you had some excitement last night. Power outage and all. Bill. Cal's greeting was polite but cool. Maggie, this is Bill Henderson. Bill, Maggie Thompson. Her car broke down in the storm, so she stayed the night. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly. That's so. Car trouble, huh? His tone suggested he found this explanation insufficient. Transmission's shot, Cal said evenly. Earl Peterson took a look this morning. Shame. Henderson's attention remained fixed on Maggie. You from around here, miss? Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks. She recognized the tone, the barely concealed judgment. This man had already decided she was some kind of threat or impropriety, and nothing she said would change his mind. I'm from Montana originally, she said, keeping her voice steady. I've been traveling, looking for work. What kind of work? The question felt like an interrogation, and Maggie found herself glancing at Cal for support. His jaw was tight, but he didn't intervene. This was her test to face. Library work, mostly. Administration, organization, that sort of thing. Henderson snorted. Not much call for librarians out here. Most folks got internet for their reading needs. The dismissal stung, but Maggie straightened her shoulders. There's always a need for people who know how to organize information and manage records. Libraries aren't just about books anymore, I suppose. Henderson's tone suggested he remained unconvinced. He turned back to Cal. You planning on giving her a ride into town? Bus station's not far. The implication was clear. Time for the stranger to move along before she caused any trouble. Maggie felt the familiar shame rising, the sense that she was an imposition, a problem to be solved rather than a person with value. But then Cal stepped closer to her, his presence warm and solid at her side. Actually, Bill, I've offered Maggie a position here, ranch administration. I've been needing help with the business side of things for a while now. Henderson's expression shifted from suspicious to openly skeptical. That so? Funny, I don't recall you mentioning needing help before. Yesterday. Maybe because it's none of your business how I run my ranch. Cal's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Unless you've got cattle wandering onto my property or some other neighborly concern, I can't see how my staffing decisions affect you. The two men stared at each other for a long moment, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Henderson shrugged. Just looking out for you, Cal. Stranger shows up out of nowhere. Car breaks down convenient, like now she's got herself a job and a place to stay. Might make some folks wonder about her motivations. Good thing her motivations are between me and her then. Cal's tone brooked no argument. Henderson climbed back into his truck, but rolled down the window. Before driving away, you know where to find me if you need anything, Cal. Keep your eyes open. As the truck disappeared down the driveway, Maggie felt like she might be sick. The confrontation had stripped away the peaceful morning, reminding her of all the reasons why accepting Cal's offer was dangerous. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I shouldn't have. This is exactly what I was afraid of. People talking, making assumptions. Bill Henderson's been making assumptions about everybody's business for 30 years, Cal said firmly. His opinion doesn't matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to you either. But he's your neighbor, your community. I don't want to cause problems for you. Cal turned to face her fully, his expression intense. Maggie, look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly to meet his. I've spent 20 years worrying about what other people think, trying to prove I'm good enough, responsible enough, normal enough to deserve their respect. You know what it got me? 20 years of loneliness and a house too quiet to bear. His voice grew softer. I'm done caring more about other people's opinions than my own happiness. The declaration hung in the air between them, and Maggie felt something shift in her chest. Here was a man willing to risk community judgment for the possibility of genuine connection. When was the last time anyone had taken that kind of stand for her? What if this doesn't work? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then we'll figure it out together, Cal said simply. But what if it does work? What if this is exactly what we've both been looking for without knowing it? Standing there in the morning sun, with Scout panting happily at their feet, and the mountains rising majestically in the distance, Maggie felt something. she hadn't experienced in 25 years. She felt like she might be home. The word home had barely formed in Maggie's mind when panic set in. Home meant roots. Home meant staying. Home meant trusting that this fragile, impossible thing between her and Cal wouldn't shatter the moment she let herself believe in it. "I need to call my former landlord," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "To tell him I won't be back for my security deposit, and cancel my mail forwarding, and figure out what to do about my library certification renewal." Cal watched her pace in small circles, her breathing becoming shallow and quick. "Maggie, double quotes ... and I should probably check if there are any library systems in the area, just in case this doesn't work out and I need to find something else. Maggie, because I can't just assume this will be permanent, and I should have backup plans. And what if I'm making a huge mistake? Maggie, stop." Cal's voice was gentle but firm. He stepped into her pacing pattern, his large hands settling carefully on her shoulders. "Breathe." She looked up at him, seeing her own fear reflected in his brown eyes. But there was something else there too, understanding. He knew exactly what she was going through because he'd been through it himself. "You don't have to decide everything right now," he said quietly. "You don't have to commit to forever. Just try it for a month. See how it feels. If it doesn't work, I'll help you figure out what comes next." A month. The time frame felt both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. Long enough to get attached, short enough that leaving would still destroy her. What if I mess up your books? What if I accidentally order the wrong supplies or make some mistake that costs you thousands of dollars? Cal's mouth quirked into a small smile. "Then we'll figure out how to fix it. Maggie, I've been running this place alone for 15 years. I've made every mistake you can imagine and a few you probably can't. The ranch survived my learning curve. It'll survive yours too." Before she could voice another fear, the sound of hoofbeats on the gravel drive interrupted them. A young woman on horseback was approaching at an easy canter, her blonde hair streaming behind her beneath a well-worn cowboy hat. "That's Emma Caldwell," Cal explained as the rider drew closer. "She helps out during busy seasons. Good kid, reminds me of myself at that age, except with better horse sense." Emma pulled up near them, her mount a spirited paint horse dancing sideways with barely contained energy. She was maybe 25, with sun-weathered hands and the kind of confidence that came from years in the saddle. "Morning, Cal," she called out, then turned curious eyes to Maggie. "Sorry to interrupt. Wanted to let you know the fence line in the north pasture needs attention. Looks like lightning hit that old oak tree, and it took out about 20 feet of wire when it fell. Damn." Cal ran a hand through his hair. "I was hoping we'd get through spring without any major repairs." "Thanks for catching it before the cattle did," Emma grinned. "Part of the job. You want me to start on it today, or wait until tomorrow when Jake can help? Better start today. Can't risk having cattle wander onto Henderson's property. He's already looking for reasons to complain." Something in Cal's tone made Emma's expression sharpen. "Bill giving you trouble again? Nothing I can't handle." Cal glanced at Maggie. "Emma, I'd like you to meet Maggie Thompson. She's going to be helping with the ranch administration." Emma's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile was genuine as she leaned down to offer a handshake. "Nice to meet you, Maggie. About time Cal got some help around here. Man's been trying to do everything himself for too long." "I'm still learning," Maggie said, accepting the handshake and finding Emma's grip firm and honest. "Aren't we all?" Emma straightened in her saddle. "You ever work with cattle before?" "Never." "Well, if you're sticking around, you'll learn quick. They're not as complicated as people make them out to be. Mostly they just want food, water, and to be left alone." Emma's grin widened. "Come to think of it, that's pretty much what most people want too." Despite her anxiety, Maggie found herself smiling back. There was something refreshingly straightforward about Emma, no hidden agendas or judgment in her manner. "I should get moving on that fence," Emma said, gathering her reins. "Cal, you want me to bring the portable panels when I come back tomorrow? Might be smart to reinforce that whole section." Good thinking. And Emma, thanks for keeping an eye on things. "Always." "Do." Emma touched the brim of her hat in Maggie's direction. "Hope to see you around, Maggie. Place could use some feminine influence." As Emma cantered away toward the damaged fence line, Maggie found herself envying the young woman's easy confidence, her clear sense of purpose and belonging. "She seems nice," Maggie said. "Emma's good people. Been helping out here since she was 16. Her dad owns the spread to the south, smaller operation than this, but they've got good horses." Cal paused. "She's right, you know. About me trying to do everything myself for too long. Is that why you offered me this job? Because you need help with the work?" Cal was quiet for a moment, his gaze following Emma's retreating figure. "Partly, but mostly because last night was the first time in 20 years that I didn't feel like I was echoing around this place like a ghost." The admission hit her square in the chest. How many nights had she felt exactly the same way, rattling around empty apartments, talking to herself just to hear a human voice? "Cal ... double quotes," she started, then stopped. What could she say? Bet she felt it too, that for the first time in 25 years, she wasn't afraid of the silence because it was shared silence. "I know it's crazy," he continued, not looking at her. "Offering a partnership to someone I met 12 hours ago. My dad would probably roll over in his grave. But sometimes you just know, you know? Sometimes you meet someone and everything just fits." Fits. The word resonated through her like a tuning fork. Because it did fit somehow. The comfortable conversation, the shared understanding, the way he seemed to anticipate her needs without making her feel helpless. Even the way he argued with her, respectful but firm, giving her space to disagree without dismissing her concerns. "What would people think?" she asked quietly. "Besides Bill Henderson, I mean, the whole community." Cal finally looked at her, his expression serious. "Honestly, some will probably gossip. Wonder about the woman who showed up out of nowhere and got herself a job and a place to stay. Others might be happy to see I'm not completely isolated anymore." He shrugged. "And some won't care one way or the other as long as the ranch runs smoothly and I don't cause them any trouble." That's not exactly reassuring. "Maggie, I spent the first 5 years after Sarah left trying to prove to this community that I was fine on my own. Threw myself into church committees and town councils. Showed up at every social event with a smile plastered on my face. You know what I learned?" She shook her head. "That you can't earn respect by pretending to be something you're not. People see through it eventually. The ones worth knowing will accept you as you are, and the ones who won't, well, their opinion doesn't matter anyway." The wisdom in his words was hard-earned, she could tell. 20 years of navigating small-town politics and judgment had taught him lessons she was just beginning to understand. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "Of letting myself want this. Of believing it could work and then having it fall apart." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I've gotten very good at not wanting things I can't have. It's safer." Cal stepped closer, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "What if you're wrong? What if this is something you can have? Then I'd be the luckiest woman alive." The words slipped out before she could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying in their vulnerability. Cal's expression softened. "Would you be willing to find out?" Before she could answer, Scout came bounding around the corner of the barn, a stick clutched in his jaws and his tail wagging furiously. He dropped the stick at Maggie's feet and looked up at her expectantly, tongue lolling. "He wants you to throw it," Cal explained unnecessarily. Maggie picked up the stick, noting how Scout's entire attention focused on her movement. When she threw it toward the pasture, He tore after it with pure joy, his black and white form a blur against the green grass. "He trusts me," she said wonderingly. "Animals are good judges of character. Scout wouldn't have brought you his stick if he didn't think you were worth his time." Scout returned with the stick, dropping it again at her feet. This time when she threw it, she felt a small smile tugging at her lips. Such a simple thing, playing fetch with a dog in the morning sunshine, but it felt like a revelation. When was the last time she'd done something purely for joy? "Okay," she said as Scout bounded back toward them. "Okay, 1 month." The words came out stronger than she felt. "I'll try it for 1 month." Cal's face transformed, hope and relief and something deeper flickering across his features. "You mean it?" "I mean it. But I have conditions." "Name them." "I pay for my own food and contribute to household expenses. I won't be a charity case." "Agreed. What else?" "If it doesn't work out for either of us, we handle it like adults. No hard feelings, no drama. You help me find another situation. And we part as friends. Deal? Anything else?" Maggie took a deep breath. "I need you to be patient with me. I'm not used to this. Partnership, depending on someone, being part of a team. I might mess up the social parts, even if I get the work parts right." Cal's smile was gentle. "I might mess up too. We'll figure it out together." Together. She tested the word, finding it both foreign and appealing. "I guess I should start by looking at those books you mentioned. They're in the office. Fair warning, my filing system is more of a pile everything in boxes and hope for the best system." Maggie actually laughed at that. "Well, organization is one thing I know how to do." As they walked toward the house, Scout trotting beside them. With his stick, Maggie felt something shift inside her chest. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something she'd almost forgotten existed: anticipation. For the first time in 25 years, she was looking forward to tomorrow. Because tomorrow she wouldn't be alone. Tomorrow she would wake up in a place where someone was expecting her, counting on her, glad she was there. Tomorrow, she would start building a life instead of just surviving one. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she climbed the porch steps with Cal beside her and Scout at her heels, Maggie Thompson realized she was finally ready to come home. 3 weeks into her trial month at Morrison Ranch, Maggie discovered that Cal hadn't been exaggerating about his filing system. What he'd modestly called piling everything in boxes was actually more like create an archaeological dig of paperwork spanning 15 years. She sat cross-legged on the office floor, surrounded by manila folders, receipts, and veterinary records that seemed to have been organized by the throw-it-in-a-box-and-deal-with-it-later method. Her laptop, a 10-year-old machine that had seen better days, hummed on the desk as she entered data into the spreadsheet system she'd created. "Find everything you need?" Cal's voice came from the doorway, accompanied by the smell of fresh coffee and hay. Maggie looked up from a crumpled receipt for cattle feed dated 2018. "I found a warranty card for a tractor part from 2009. 3 Christmas cards from your feed supplier, and what appears to be Emma's report card from high school. But the invoice for last month's veterinary visit, that's still a mystery." Cal winced. "I may have used that as a coaster for my coffee mug, Cal Morrison." Maggie tried to sound stern, but the laugh in her voice ruined the effect. "You can't use important documents as coasters." In my defense, it was really important coffee. Over the past 3 weeks, she discovered that Cal had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard at the most unexpected moments. Like yesterday, when she'd asked about the ranch's insurance policies, and he'd deadpanned, "Well, we're insured against acts of God, but I'm not sure stupidity counts as divine intervention." "I'm creating a filing system," she announced, gesturing to the neat piles she'd arranged around the room. "Color-coded folders, chronological organization, and a backup system on the computer. By the end of the month, you'll actually be able to find your important documents End of the month. Cal's expression grew serious. That's next week, isn't it? The reminder sent an unexpected flutter of anxiety through Maggie's chest. Their month-long trial was almost over, and neither of them had brought up what came next. She'd thrown herself into organizing his chaos, learning the rhythms of ranch life, and trying not to think about how naturally she'd fallen into this new existence. Yes, she said simply, not trusting herself to say more. Cal leaned against the doorframe, studying her face. Any thoughts about that? Before she could answer, Scout came barreling into the room, tail wagging as he delivered his daily offering today, a slightly mangled tennis ball that had seen better days. He dropped it at Maggie's feet and sat back on his haunches, tongue lolling expectantly. Not now, Scout, she said, but she was already reaching for the ball. The morning game of fetch had become a ritual she looked forward to more than she cared to admit. Go on, Cal said, settling into the desk chair. The paperwork will still be here when you get back. But Scout's only young once. As they walked outside, Maggie marveled at how different the ranch looked now that she knew its rhythms. She could identify the sound of the cattle settling for their morning rest, distinguish between Luna's demanding whinny and Thunder's more polite request for attention. The mountains no longer seemed like distant decoration, but like familiar guardians watching over their daily activities. Scout bounded across the yard, chasing the tennis ball with the same enthusiasm he'd shown 3 weeks ago. But something was different today. Instead of bringing it back to Cal, as he usually did, he returned it directly to Maggie. Well, would you look at that, Cal said, settling onto the porch steps beside her. You've been officially adopted. What do you mean? Scouts chose you. Used to be. He'd only play fetch with me. Now look at him, you're his favorite human. The observation sent a warm glow through Maggie's chest. She'd spent so many years feeling like an outsider, someone who passed through other people's lives without leaving a mark. The idea that this loyal, intelligent animal had chosen her felt like a small miracle. Animals know, Cal continued, watching Scout race after the ball again. They can sense when someone's got a good heart, when they're safe to trust. Scouts never been wrong about a person yet. And what does that tell you about me? Cal's smile was soft and genuine. That I was right to ask you to stay. The word stay hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them seemed ready to address directly. Instead, they sat in comfortable silence, watching Scout explore the morning shadows cast by the barn. Maggie. Cal's voice was careful, measured. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you miss it? Your old life, I mean. The city, the libraries, the independence of going wherever you wanted. The question surprised her with its complexity. Did she miss her old life? The constant uncertainty, the endless job searching, the nights lying awake in cheap motels wondering where she'd be next month. I miss some things, she said honestly. I miss feeling useful in the way librarians are useful, helping people find information, connecting them with resources they need. I miss books sometimes. Real libraries with that particular smell of old paper and binding glue. Cal nodded, accepting her honesty without defensiveness. But, she continued, I don't miss the fear. I don't miss wondering if I'll be able to afford rent next month, or if my car will start in the morning, or if I'll still have a job next week. I don't miss eating dinner alone every single night for 25 years. You're not alone here. No, she agreed quietly. I'm not. They were interrupted by the sound of an approaching vehicle, Emma's battered pickup truck winding up the drive with a trailer in tow. She parked near the barn and hopped out, her blonde hair escaping from beneath a baseball cap. Morning, she called out, waving. Brought those panels Cal wanted for the north fence. Also brought news from town, if you're interested. Good news. Or bad news? Cal asked as they walked over to meet her. Depends on how you look at it. The Hendersons are selling their ranch. Cal stopped walking. What? Bill's wife finally convinced him to retire to Arizona. They're listing with Garrett Real Estate next week. Emma began unloading the metal panels with practiced efficiency. Asking price is pretty steep, but the land's good quality. Maggie watched Cal's expression change as he processed this information. The Henderson Ranch bordered Morrison, property to the east prime grazing land that would nearly double Cal's operation if he could afford to buy it. How steep? He asked. $2.5 million for the land, livestock, and equipment. Cal let out a low whistle. That's more than steep. That's impossible. Is it? Emma paused in her unloading. I mean, you've been talking for years about wanting to expand, and with Maggie here to help with the business side, ... She glanced between them meaningfully. Emma, Cal's voice held a warning note. I'm just saying, maybe it's time to think bigger. You've got the best grazing land in the county, a solid reputation, and now you've got someone who actually knows how to run the business end of things. Emma grinned at Maggie. No offense to Cal's previous organizational methods. None taken. Maggie said, though her mind was racing. $2.5 million. It was an astronomical sum, the kind of money that required serious planning, bank loans, and the kind of long-term commitment that her month-long trial arrangement couldn't possibly support. Something to think about, Emma said, hefting the last panel from the truck, but you'd need to move fast. Word is, there are already a couple of developers interested in subdividing the land for vacation homes. After Emma left to work on the fence repairs, Cal and Maggie walked back toward the house in thoughtful silence. The Henderson Ranch stretched out beyond the tree-lined rolling pastures that Maggie now knew by sight, good water access, and a barn that was newer and larger than Cal's current setup. It's a pipe dream, Cal said finally as they reached the zing porch. Even if the bank would consider lending me that kind of money, which they probably wouldn't, I'd be in debt for the next 30 years. That's not fair to ask someone to take on. Ask someone? Maggie turned to look at him. You mean me? Cal ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncomfortable. I know we haven't talked about after the month is up. But if you were thinking about staying permanently, making this a real partnership, well, taking on that kind of expansion would affect both of us. The conversation they'd been avoiding for weeks was suddenly front and center, unavoidable and fraught with implications. Maggie felt her pulse quicken. Cal, she started, then stopped. How could she explain that the thought of permanent partnership both thrilled and terrified her? That she'd spent the last 3 weeks fighting the growing certainty that she never wanted to leave this place. These rhythms, this life they were building together? I know it's a lot to ask, he continued quickly. Hell, it's probably crazy to even consider. A man who's been alone for 20 years and a woman who's been drifting for 25, thinking they can build something permanent together. Is that what you want? The question came out smaller than she intended. Something permanent? Cal stopped walking and turned to face her fully. In the morning light, she could see the vulnerability in his brown eyes, the careful hope he was trying not to show. Maggie, these past 3 weeks have been the best I've had in 20 years. Waking up knowing you'll be here, coming in for lunch and finding you've reorganized something that actually works better than before, sitting on the porch in the evenings and just talking about everything and nothing, about dreams and fears and whether we should plant a bigger garden next year. Next year, she repeated softly. I know I'm getting ahead of myself. I know a month isn't long enough to make life-changing decisions. But yes, if you're asking what I want you to stay. Not as a trial run, not as a temporary arrangement. I want to build something real with you, whether that's buying the Henderson place or just making this ranch the best it can be with what we have. The honesty in his voice undid something in Maggie's chest. For 3 weeks she'd been telling herself this was just a job, just a place to stay while she figured out her next move. But somewhere between organizing his disaster of an office and learning to read the weather patterns in the mountain sky, she'd started building a life. "I want that too," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "I want to stay. I want to be your partner. I want to plant a bigger garden and argue about filing systems and figure out if we can afford to buy Henderson's land." Cal's smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and transformative. "You mean it?" "I mean it, but Cal?" She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "I think we need to talk about what kind of partnership we're building here." "What do you mean?" Maggie took a deep breath, gathering courage for the most honest thing she'd said in 25 years. "I mean that somewhere in the last 3 weeks this stopped feeling like just business to me. And I need to know if it feels the same way to you." Cal's expression grew very still, very serious. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Maggie Thompson, nothing about this has felt like just business from the moment you knocked on my door." The admission hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Because the partnership they'd been building carefully, respectfully, without pressure or expectation, had been growing into something deeper all along. Something that felt suspiciously like coming home. 2 days after their admission that this partnership had become something more than business, Maggie stood in the Millbrook First National Bank, wearing her best blouse and a nervous smile, while Cal discussed loan options with a banker who looked skeptical about their entire proposal. "So let me understand this correctly, Mr. Morrison," said Robert Carlyle, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed their application. "You want to borrow $2.5 million for a ranch expansion, with a business partner who's been with you for less than a month?" 3.5 weeks, Cal corrected mildly, though Maggie could see the tension in his jaw. "And Miss Thompson," Carlyle turned his attention to her, "your previous experience in ranch management consists of?" "Organizational systems, financial record-keeping, and general business administration," Maggie replied, keeping her voice steady, despite the familiar feeling of being judged and found wanting. "I've completely restructured Mr. Morrison's bookkeeping system and identified several areas where operational efficiency could be improved." Carlyle made a note on his pad. "I see. And what collateral are you prepared to offer for a loan of?" "This magnitude. The current ranch property, valued at $1.8 million, Cal said, plus livestock, equipment, and future earnings projections based on the expanded operation, which would put you leveraged at approximately 125% of your current assets." Carlyle set down his pen. "Mr. Morrison, I've known you since you were a boy coming in here with your father. This bank has always been willing to work with the Morrison family, but what you're proposing is extremely high risk." Maggie watched Cal's hands clench slightly on the armrests of his chair. They'd spent the previous evening going over the numbers, running projections, dreaming about what they could build together. The expanded operation would allow them to nearly triple their cattle herd, improve breeding programs, and establish Morrison Ranch as one of the premier operations in the state. But sitting in this sterile office, facing Carlyle's skeptical expression, those dreams felt foolishly optimistic. "What would it take?" Maggie asked suddenly. Both men turned to look at her. "What would you need to see to approve a loan like this?" Carlyle considered the question. "Honestly, a longer track record of partnership, more collateral, and probably a more conservative expansion plan. If you were talking about borrowing, say, $800,000 to purchase just the land without the livestock and equipment, that wouldn't work," Cal said firmly. "Henderson's selling it as a package deal. It's all or nothing. Then I'm afraid my hands are tied." Carlyle closed their file with finality. "I simply can't recommend approval for a loan of this size, given the current circumstances." They drove home in silence, the weight of disappointment heavy between them. Maggie stared out the window at the familiar landscape, trying not to think about how much she'd wanted this dream to work. how much she'd wanted to prove that their partnership was strong enough to build something extraordinary. "I'm sorry," Cal said finally as they turned into the ranch driveway. "For what?" "For getting carried away. For making you think we could pull off something this big when we barely know each other." He parked the truck and turned to face her. "Emma was right about one thing. I have been thinking about expansion for years. But I should have started smaller, more realistic." Maggie unbuckled her seatbelt, but didn't get out of the truck. "Cal, do you regret asking me to stay?" "What?" He looked genuinely shocked. "No, God no. Why would you think that?" "Because if I hadn't been here, you wouldn't have gotten your hopes up about Henderson's place. You'd still be running your ranch the way you always have, content with what you had." Cal was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the house they'd both started thinking of as home. "You're right. If you hadn't been here, I wouldn't have dreamed this big. But that's not a bad thing, Maggie. Before you came, I was existing, not living. Going through the motions but not really building anything for the future. And now I want everything. The expanded ranch, the bigger dreams, a real partnership that lasts longer than either of us can imagine." He turned to look at her directly. "Even if we can't buy Henderson's place, even if we have to build more slowly than we hoped, I still want all of it, with you." The intensity in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. "Even after today? After seeing how the bank looks at you like we're naive dreamers who don't know what we're getting into? Especially after today." Cal reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and calloused against hers. "Because I saw how you handled yourself in there. Professional, prepared, not backing down when Carlyle tried to dismiss you. You defended our partnership like it was already everything we wanted to become." Before Maggie could respond, they were interrupted by Emma's truck pulling up beside them. She hopped out with her usual energy, then stopped when she saw their expressions. "Uh-oh, banking didn't go well, I'm guessing?" "Not exactly," Cal said, climbing out of his truck. "Carlyle thinks we're too high risk for the full amount." "Damn!" Emma leaned against her truck, processing this news. "What about a smaller loan, partial purchase? Henderson won't split up the sale. It's all or nothing." Emma was quiet for a moment, then straightened with the look of someone who just had an idea. "What if it wasn't just you two applying for the loan?" "What do you mean?" Maggie asked. "I mean, what if you had additional partners? People who could contribute capital and collateral to make the bank more comfortable with the risk." Cal shook his head. "Emma, I appreciate the thought, but I can't ask people to invest their money in something this uncertain." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Emma's grin was determined. "I've been saving for years to buy my own place, but I've never found the right opportunity. This could be it. Instead of starting from scratch somewhere else, I could invest in an operation I already know and trust." Emma ... quotes Cal started. "Hear me out. I've got $50,000 in savings, plus I could use my dad's ranch as additional collateral. He's been wanting to scale back anyway. This could be perfect for both of us." Maggie felt a flutter of hope in her chest, but also apprehension. "That's incredibly generous, Emma, but this would be a huge financial commitment for you. What if it doesn't work?" Emma's expression grew serious. "What if it does? Cal, you've been running this place with one hand tied behind your back for years, trying to do everything yourself. With Maggie handling the business side and me as a full partner instead of just seasonal help, we could build something amazing." "A three-way partnership?" Cal looked between the two women. "That's not what Maggie and I discussed." "Maybe it should be," Maggie said quietly. Both Cal and Emma turned to look at her. "Emma, you know this land, this work, this community better than I ever will. And you're right, Cal has been trying to do too much alone. Maybe what we need isn't just business partners, but a real team." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. A partnership with Cal had felt risky enough. Adding a third person to the mix complicated everything. But as she watched Emma's hopeful, expression and saw the possibility dawning in Cal's eyes. Maggie realized this might be exactly what they needed. It would change everything, Cal said slowly. It would change everything, Emma agreed. The question is whether we're brave enough to try. That evening, the three of them sat around Cal's kitchen table with calculators, legal pads, and more. Coffee then was probably healthy. They'd called Emma's father, who was surprisingly enthusiastic about the idea of partnering with Morrison Ranch. They'd sketched out profit-sharing agreements, discussed management responsibilities, and dreamed about what they could accomplish together. So Emma would handle livestock management and breeding programs, Maggie said, reviewing her notes. I'd manage finances, supply chain, and administrative functions. And Cal would oversee overall operations and land management. With all major decisions made by consensus, Cal added. Nobody gets outvoted or steamrolled. And if it doesn't work out? Emma asked. If we can't make the payments or the partnership goes sour? It was the question they'd all been thinking but avoiding. Maggie set down her pen and looked at her. Potential partners, these two people who were willing to risk everything on a shared dream. Then we fail together, she said quietly. But at least we fail trying to build something worth building. Cal nodded slowly. I'd rather fail attempting something extraordinary than succeed at playing it safe. Same here, Emma said. Besides, look at what we've each been doing on our own. Cal, you've been barely breaking even for years, too conservative to expand. Maggie, you've been drifting from job to job with no security. And I've been working for other people's dreams instead of building my own. And together? Cal asked. Together, we might actually have a shot at something bigger than any of us could manage alone. The next morning, they drove back to First National Bank as a team. Robert Carlyle's expression shifted from skeptical to intrigued as Emma laid out her financial contribution and her father's willingness to provide additional collateral. This changes the risk profile considerably, he admitted, reviewing their revised application. With 3 partners and multiple properties as collateral, plus Ms. Caldwell's demonstrated experience in livestock management. Are you saying you'll approve the loan? Maggie asked, trying to keep the hope out of her voice. I'm saying I'll present this to the loan committee with a positive recommendation. The final decision will be up to them, but this is a much stronger application than what you brought me yesterday. As they left the bank, Maggie felt like she was walking on air. Not because the loan was guaranteed, they still had to wait for the committee's decision, but because for the first time in her adult life, she was part of something bigger than herself. Whatever happens, she said as they stood on the sidewalk outside the bank, thank you both for including me in this. Thank us? Emma laughed. Maggie, you're the one who made this possible. Cal's been talking about expansion for years, but he never would have taken the leap without you believing in it. She's right, Cal said, his voice soft with affection. You didn't just organize my filing system, Maggie. You organized my dreams. Standing there in the afternoon sunshine, surrounded by the 2 people who had become her partners in every sense of the word, Maggie Thompson realized something profound had happened over the past month, that she wasn't alone anymore. Not just romantically with Cal, not just professionally with the ranch work, but fundamentally, at the deepest level of human connection. She had a team. A family in all the ways that mattered. And for the first time in 25 years, future felt like something to run toward instead of something to survive. 6 months later, Maggie stood in the newly renovated office of what was now officially called Morrison Thompson Caldwell Ranch, watching the sunrise paint the expanded pastures in shades of gold and amber. The Henderson property stretched out before her, dotted with cattle that bore the combined brands of their 3-way partnership. The loan committee had approved their application on a crisp Friday in late spring. By Monday, they'd been signing papers, shaking hands with Bill Henderson, and planning the integration of 2 ranch operations into something bigger than either had ever been alone. that it hadn't been easy. There had been 16-hour days during the transition, heated discussions about breeding programs and grazing rotations, and moments when all three partners wondered if they'd bitten off more than they could chew. But they'd worked through each challenge together, and what had emerged was stronger than any of them had imagined. "Admiring your kingdom?" Cal's voice came from the doorway, warm with affection and the comfortable teasing that had developed between them over the months. Maggie turned to smile at him, noting how he'd filled out since spring. The constant worry lines around his eyes had eased, replaced by the confidence of a man who was building something meaningful instead of just maintaining what he'd inherited. "Our kingdom," she corrected, moving to stand beside him. "How did the vet visit go?" "Luna's pregnant," Cal announced, his grin infectious. "Due date sometime in late February. Emma thinks we might finally have found the right stallion to improve our breeding program." The news filled Maggie with unexpected joy. Luna, the gray mare who had been her first real connection to ranch life, was going to be a mother. It felt symbolic, somehow new life growing from the foundation they'd built together. "That's wonderful," she said, then paused. "Cal, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever miss it? The way things were before? When it was just you and the land and the quiet?" Cal considered the question seriously, as he always did when she asked about his feelings. It was one of the things she'd grown to love about him, his willingness to examine his own emotions without defensiveness. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Usually when Emma's playing her music too loud in the barn, or when we're having one of our three-way discussions about whether to invest in new equipment." He smiled. "But then I think about what I've gained, and the missing seems pretty small in comparison." "What have you gained?" "You," he said simply. "A partner who challenges me, supports me, and makes me want to be better than I thought I could be. Emma, who's brought more innovation to this ranch in 6 months than I managed in 20 years. A business that's actually profitable instead of just surviving." He paused. "And for the first time since my parents died, I wake up excited about the future instead of just resigned to it." Before Maggie could respond, Emma's voice carried across the yard from the direction of the barn. "Maggie, Cal, you need to see this." They hurried outside to find Emma standing beside the corral, her phone in her hand, an expression of amazed disbelief on her face. "What is it?" Cal asked. "Remember that article the Montana Rancher magazine wanted to do about our partnership model? The one we did the interview for last month? The one about innovative ranch management?" Maggie nodded. "What about it?" Emma held up her phone, showing them an email. "They want to feature us on the cover. But that's not the best part. I just got a call from the Agricultural Extension Service. They want to use our operation as a case study for sustainable partnership models in ranching." "What does that mean?" Cal asked. "It means other ranchers want to learn from what we've built here. They want to study our financial model, our division of responsibilities, our integration process. We could be pioneers in a new way of thinking about ranch ownership and management." Maggie felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly took her breath away. They'd built something worth studying, worth replicating. Their little experiment in partnership had become a model for others. "There's more," Emma continued, her excitement building. "The Extension Service wants to host a conference here next spring. Ranchers from across the region would come to tour our operation and learn about collaborative ranch management. Here?" Cal looked around at the property they'd been pouring their hearts into for months. "People would come here to learn from us?" "Apparently what we've done integrating 2 properties, creating a 3-way partnership between people with different expertise, building a profitable operation while maintaining sustainable practices. It's exactly what a lot of struggling ranchers need to see." Maggie thought about the months they'd spent doubting themselves, wondering if they were crazy to risk everything on a shared dream. Now it seemed their crazy dream was inspiring others to take similar risks. "I can't believe it," she said softly. "Believe it," Emma said, her grin wide. We did something extraordinary here. That evening, the three partners sat on Cal's front porch, which had been expanded during the summer to accommodate their regular evening planning sessions. The addition of 2 rocking chairs and a small table had transformed the space into the unofficial headquarters of their operation. So, Emma said, balancing her laptop on her knees as she responded to interview requests, Montana Rancher wants to do a photo shoot next week. And the Extension Service wants to schedule the conference for early April, when the weather's nice but before calving season gets crazy. April, Cal mused. That gives us all winter to prepare. Maybe we should think about what we want to share with people, what lessons we've learned that might actually be useful. Maggie looked at her partners, these 2 people who had become her family in every way that mattered, and thought about what they could teach others about taking risks on partnership. I think, she said slowly, the most important thing we learned is that you can't build something extraordinary by playing it safe. All 3 of us were stuck in patterns that weren't serving us. Cal was trying to do everything alone. I was drifting without putting down roots. And Emma was working for other people's dreams instead of building her own. And together, Emma prompted. Together we found the courage to want more than just survival. Cal nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that's what we share with people. Not just the business model or the financial structure, but the emotional journey. How scary it was to trust each other. How many times we second-guessed ourselves. How we learned to make decisions as a team. The human side of partnership, Emma agreed. Because anyone can copy our organizational charts and profit-sharing agreements. But the real magic is in learning to dream together. As autumn deepened into winter, their days fell into comfortable rhythms that felt both productive and peaceful. Maggie handled correspondence with the magazine, the Extension Service, and the growing number of ranchers who wanted to visit their operation. Cal focused on winterizing the expanded property and planning breeding programs for the spring. Emma managed the day-to-day care of livestock and equipment maintenance, but it was the evenings that Maggie treasured most. After Emma headed home to her small house on the property built during the summer in what used to be the Hendersons' equipment barn, Maggie and Cal would sit by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they planned for the ranch's future, sketching out 5-year growth projections and dreaming about what they might accomplish together. Other times they talked about their pasts, filling in the details of the lives they'd lived before finding each other. And sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, reading or watching the flames dance, content in the simple pleasure of shared space. It was during one of these quiet evenings in December that Cal brought up the subject they'd been dancing around for months. Maggie, he said, setting down the ranch supply catalog he'd been browsing, I've been thinking about something. What's that? About us. About what we're building here, beyond the business partnership. Maggie felt her pulse quicken. They'd been growing closer steadily since the spring, their relationship deepening from professional respect to genuine affection to something that felt like love. Though neither had spoken the word aloud. What about it? Cal moved from his chair to sit beside her on the couch, his expression serious but warm. I know we agreed to take things slowly, to let the business partnership establish itself before we complicated things with personal feelings. And I think we're past that point now, don't you? The business is solid, the partnership with Emma is working perfectly, and we've proven we can work together professionally. He paused, reaching for her hand. But more than that, I've proven to myself that what I feel for you isn't just gratitude or convenience or fear of being alone again. What is it then? Cal's smile was soft and certain. It's love, Maggie. Real, deep, lasting love. The kind that makes me want to plan a future with you that goes beyond business ventures and profit margins. The words she'd been waiting to hear, hoping for but afraid to expect, finally spoken aloud. Maggie felt tears prick her eyes as 25 years of careful emotional protection crumbled away. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since that first night, when you gave me shelter and didn't ask for anything in return except the chance to help. So what do we do about it?" Maggie thought about the question, about all the ways two people could choose to build a life together. We keep doing what we've been doing. Building something together, day by day, decision by decision. But maybe we stop pretending it's just business. Cal laughed, the sound rich with relief and joy. "I think Emma figured that out months ago. She keeps making jokes about the guest room that nobody ever uses for guests." "Speaking of Emma," Maggie said, "what do you think she'll say when we tell her we're officially together?" "I think she'll say it's about time," Cal replied, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "And then she'd probably want to throw a party to celebrate." Outside, snow began to fall softly against the windows, the first real storm of winter settling over the ranch like a blessing. Inside, by the warmth of the fire, Maggie Thompson, soon to be Maggie Morrison, if the hope in Cal's eyes was any indication, realized that her long journey through loneliness was finally over. She had found her home. Not just in the physical place, though she loved every acre of their expanded ranch, but in the people who had chosen to build a life with her. In Cal, who had seen past her defenses to the woman she could become when she felt safe enough to trust. In Emma, who had welcomed her into a partnership that felt more like sisterhood. In Scout, who still brought her his tennis ball every morning. And Luna, who nickered softly whenever Maggie approached her stall. "I've been alone for 25 years, she said softly, echoing the words she'd spoken to Cal on that first night. "Not anymore," he replied, pulling her closer to his side. "Never again." And as the snow continued to fall and the fire crackled warmly in the hearth, Maggie understood that some stories don't end with rescue or salvation. The best stories end with choice, the choice to stop running, to start building, to believe. That love and partnership and home are things worth fighting for. She had made her choice. They all had Dot and tomorrow. They would wake up and continue building their extraordinary life together, one day at a time, until the end of all their days. The Morrison Thompson Caldwell Ranch stretched out under the winter sky, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to what three brave souls could accomplish when they chose partnership over isolation, trust over fear, and love over the safety of solitude. It was, Maggie thought as she drifted off to sleep in Cal's arms, exactly the ending she had never dared to dream of. But it wasn't really an ending at all. It was just the beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.